Thanks for doing that with me.
Yeah, and remind me and maybe for the listeners too, what is Alu? It's the Ansus, Lagus, Urus,
Yes. Yes,
those three runes.
those three runes, and it's sort of like an ancient prayer, similar to the Hindu Om. But my interpretation of it is that Ansu's, the first rune, is all about the source of inspiration, the source of our voice, the source of song, the source of ecstatic inspiration, and it's associated with Odin, who is
Mm,
sort of the synthesizer of opposites. And the way I think about Ansus is like when we open our mouths to speak anytime, and even our thoughts, sort of our wordless voice, it comes from somewhere. It comes from somewhere. And I don't believe that it comes from our brain because we can't anticipate what we're going to say a few seconds from now. It sort of just comes out. And when we're singing or praying or bringing something into existence, that source that it comes from is Ansu's. And Ansu's is, when we think about it that way, it can be summoned. There's sort of an art of connecting to that source of inspiration. And so Ansu's, when we write it or speak it, it's supposed to help elevate that connection and power. And then from Ansu's, we go
can I
to,
pause you there?
yeah, please.
Just because it just resonates so much with an experience I just had yesterday. And then we can go on to Lagus, but yeah, it's just kind of like ringing a certain bell in me that I had a really great session yesterday with an energy worker, it's maybe like a mix of body work slash energy work, but it was great. I'm really stoked. One, I'm stoked that you just kind of gave me the nudge of inspiration to do it, and I'm really excited to do it for a course of like 6 months. But something she said in there in the session, it just like clicked. It was like it was that she was talking about Ansus without even maybe knowing that she was talking about Ansus. She's like, yeah, like we have these bodies that are these vehicles for reception, for like we receive information, we sense our environments, we get inspiration. And where does that inspiration come from? It's like we don't actually know, but the more we tune into it, the more we're open and saying yes, the more we get to just like follow it and create. Like you like creativity, where does that come from, right? Like most people I know say like it just comes through me.
Hmm.
I'm just the vehicle, right? Like a song just, ooh, it came to me. I didn't make it up, but I allowed it. And I'm just really wanting to just pause and like sit with that. I don't know, the profundity of that idea of like we don't know where it comes from.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
it's wild. And each human being is that receptor. We're just transmuting energy. It's coming through our bodies, and our
Mhm.
voice is one of the most powerful ways that it can come through us. Like that's why
Yeah.
I'm so fascinated by art and music, because great artists and musicians, they tune their tool being their body or their voice or their ability to play an instrument. They tune that tool so well that they can allow the inspiration to come through more effectively. It's like they
Mhm.
have this inspiration for something to come out. Something needs to come out of this body. And if I'm good enough at my craft, whatever that is, whether it's painting or drawing or playing an instrument or singing, then that inspiration can come through more clearly and more effectively. And it's the job of the artist or the musician to practice whatever it is that they're good at so that when the inspiration comes, they're ready.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes me think of this connection between like discipline and freedom. I think that might sound paradoxical. And even there's a part of my head where like those two things feel different. But if you're just like, no, I'm just going to express freely, that's one way of doing things. And you can, that can be a certain form of expression, but to really like, there's something about these like fine arts that when we look at someone who's trained their whole life and they've done the discipline of like, no, I'm going to do, and I'm going to work on like shading a circle, right? And like they've done that so many times, and I'm going to practice my lines, I'm going to practice my notes, I'm going to practice the chunked down forms of the movement. And that way when they're actually, when they, like you said, get the inspiration, like they can move so freely and actually express something deeper, or like fully express something, as opposed to, I don't know, I'm thinking of like a child who's just like, look at me dance, and like it's beautiful and they're expressing something, but maybe that's not the best example, I don't know, but there's a connection between like the discipline, I'm just going to do this thing and tune this note so that then I can fully express something bigger.
Well, what you're pointing to is when somebody's really good at something, whether it's a dance or an art or whatever, it looks natural. And that's because they've had the years of discipline behind it. It looks so free flowing and natural, whatever they're doing, because they've put in all the work to make it that way. Like
Yeah.
I actually liked your example of a child because children are full freedom. There's no
Mm-hmm.
discipline, there's no logic with the child. They're fully engaged, and we need to take note of that too because there's nothing holding them back. They just express, and they haven't had the time on this earth even to figure out how to walk right or like use a fork and knife. But there's that full freedom, right? And then as we become adults and we find things that we enjoy and that we like, we purposely engage in that discipline so that we can express more freely. Like they're intimately connected and there's no way around both of them. Like people who are really good, I've heard people say, "Oh, well, he's just naturally talented at that." Well, yeah, he might be naturally talented, but he also worked the shit out of it and practiced every day and was dedicated to his craft.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a balance between, excuse me, between all those things and how we embody discipline and freedom is how we express really. So I love that you brought that up. I love that you had that experience with that woman, and I'm excited to see what it does for you too.
Yeah. Yeah. Me too. Me too. Hmm. I was just thinking there's another side we could talk about of like the discipline freedom. One is like, okay, the discipline to hone the craft then allows for freedom of expression. But there's also something else that maybe I'm still learning. This is like there's freedom in the discipline, right? If I'm like, oh, I'm just going to go with the flow. We talk about this a lot, right? Like the polarities between like flow and structure. And if I'm just like going with the flow, that's a certain kind of freedom. But there's also a freedom within structure. If I'm just like, nope, this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm committed to. There's a different kind of freedom. Or I think about, I got married recently, so I'm learning what it's like to be on this side of this commitment. And that's a certain kind of discipline. It's like, nope, I'm here. And I'm learning that there's a lot of freedom within that. There's something that happens that's happening for me it continues to kind of blossom within me. It's like something else relaxes because I don't have to entertain the idea of, oh, well, is this the right relationship, or am I going to do my morning practice? Right. So there's like a freedom of like, that's decided. I can just be here and face whatever I need to face, or just do what else I need to do within that structure of discipline. I think that's an interesting, I don't know, relationship.
Well, it takes away the suffering of choice, right? Oftentimes, choice creates suffering. If we have too many choices, or if we're compelled to make a choice that's really difficult, that brings forth some suffering. But if the choice is already made, you can relax because you just know that it has to happen.
Mm,
It has to be done, or the choice has already been made for you, so you don't have to make another choice. There's a lightness there.
yeah. Huh. Wow. I I love how we just jump into conversation, and it just takes us places, It's like, I had no idea we're going to talk about any of this, and we're just following the thread. So okay, so that was Ansus
Yeah.
plus whatever else that led us to. And then we
Well,
have
very fitting.
Lagus.
Yeah, very fitting that all that came out after
Yeah.
we discussed Ansu's. It's like
Yeah.
the voice has been opened. And
Hmm.
that's part of the reason I like that prayer is and that it starts that way. Uh, so Ansu's the source of inspiration and the voice. And then it moves to Lagus, which it's a very simple symbol. It sort of like a very simple waterfall or an upside down curved L. But that rune is all about flow. It's all about water. It's associated with lakes and the flow of water. It's also associated with healing. And I find that interesting that water and healing are always associated with one another. So you move from the source of inspiration and opening the voice to letting it flow out of you, letting your inspiration flow freely. And when we summon the power of Lagus, we are inviting that flow into our lives.
Hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. I love that you said that, like, yeah, water is always associated with healing, the healing waters, like you take a bath, you wash off the old, something. I mean, even like getting baptized, right? That's a thing in Christian religion, probably other religions as well. But like there's something about like going underneath the water or getting washed with holy water. Um, and there's something too, like especially like the lake image, like water is also associated with like the unconscious, right? Like the deep waters of your soul, of your like, so you have like Ansu's, to me feels like it's coming from above, like this inspiration of spirit.
Hmm.
And then you have Lagus, where it's just like the depths of like these deep waters and letting that flow. And so already I'm like sensing this connection between above and below.
Hmm. I had actually not thought about it that way, but I love the connection that you're making. And that sort of brings us to the last rune, which is Uruz. And historically, Uruz is associated with like they called it an auroch, which is
Mhm.
an old sort of bull or cow. And they associate it with the aurochs because they had these huge horns and they could
Mhm.
like puncture their horn into the ground and like dig up the earth. And they were a really strong creature. They're powerful. And so Uruz has to do with might and strength and the body. And interestingly, the Old Norse mythology starts with Audumla, which is a cow, the great cosmic mother, this cow, and
Mhm.
she releases her nourishing milk into the cosmos, and that's somewhat associated with the Milky Way. And
Mm.
my insight around this rune is that it's very, very much connected with the might and power of creation.
Mm.
Like Adumla is the source of all creation, and she nourishes all beings with her milk. And
Mm.
she also, cows defecate. They fertilize the land. And
Mhm.
so she's very much connected with the earth. The cow shits in the field, and the cow dung fertilizes the field and creates life because microbes thrive on the dung that's been put on the soil.
Mhm.
So there's all this beautiful mythological association, but at its core, it's about like archaic power and might.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that. And I love you said it. I mean, my biggest association with Urus is it's like a U, but it's pointing down, right? And
Hmm.
so you said like the horns, they can like stick them into the earth and dig up the earth. And just even that, like that gesture is like here's all this energy. Like horns are like they're piercing. There's this like kind of like yang energy to bring in, the yin yang polarities, but it's like normally they're pointing upwards. We think about them as like pointing up, even like antenna. I can think of that as like there's two antennas, but to then point them into the earth is like that energy is like seeding the earth, which is beautiful. For what's the cow's name? The
Adumla.
Adumla,
Yeah.
Adumla, right? So it's like this energy that goes into the earth with the compost, with even just like the horns going in there. There's like charging it up. It's like making manifest.
Yes. Yes. And also, I find it interesting that it's associated with a cow, and we find in a lot of ancient traditions that a cow is highly revered. But I imagine for ancient Germanic and Norse peoples, the cow was really, for them, a true source of life
Mm.
because they mostly lived on livestock. They had crops and they had to grow crops to survive the winter, but one of their biggest forms of currency was cattle, and also probably one of their biggest sources of food was cattle. And the cattle, they do so many amazing things. They fertilize the field, they feed the people, they nourish the children with their milk, they could create butter, and also mushrooms grow out of their dung, which allowed them to commune with the gods.
Mm.
So there's a lot of power associated with the aurochs, and I think why it was one of the first runes in the line of runes, the Futhark, right after Fehu, which is also associated with the source of cosmic power and cattle.
Mhm.
That's what they used to trade was their cattle. That was the form. They revered it so much that they were like, okay, this has the highest value for us right now. What can I trade my cow for? Well, I can trade it for a lot. I could probably trade it for
Mhm.
land, trade it for servants. I could trade it for, clothing, whatever. If you had a lot of cattle, you were wealthy. You
Yeah.
could sustain yourself and your family for a long time just on those cattle.
Mm.
And so bringing it back to Alu, we've got the opening of the voice and the source of inspiration. May that voice and inspiration flow freely through me and with power and might. So when
Mm.
we chant Alu, we're inviting that inspiration to flow with power and might through us.
Mm. I love it. That's great. And how do you have a practice of chanting this regularly, or like how do you use it?
I, especially for things like this, when we're going to be having conversation, I like to kind of just like silently chant it to myself, or, as you just felt, it's more powerful to do it out loud and together. I would love to do it with a group of people, but I sort of, when I'm chanting it, I sort of visualize in my mind those three runes in a row as I'm saying it and try to align myself internally to their power. I don't have a specific practice, and it's also sort of hard to put into words, but that prayer has sort of embedded itself within me, and I call upon it when I need power,
Mm.
is the way I look at it, or when I need to summon my voice, like before a workshop or something.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Mm.
And one last association with that is, alu, it even sounds like ale. And that's sort of, if you think about things in exoteric and esoteric uh, terms, I would say the exoteric meaning of alu is ale. It's like beer. They were fermenting back then, and as a means to preserve water, as a means of preserving medicine. And so alu became ale. And what everything that we just discussed was more of the esoteric kind of hidden interpretation that people, I believe they're called scythe practitioners, people who are sort of like shamanistic, would probably understand it in that esoteric interpretation. And I just find that interesting too, because they really revered, this connection to the beyond, this connection to Odin, the source of all life and inspiration. And Odin had one eye in the material realm, and he gave his eye for the wisdom of the runes, his other eye, and that other eye sort of remained in the spirit realm. So he has one eye in the material and one eye in the spiritual, and he synthesizes the two and draws upon wisdom from the spiritual realm. And
Mm.
one of the ways in which the old Norse Germanic people would connect was through ale. They would drink ale, not only
Mm.
festively and for celebration, but they would use it ecstatically to connect with the gods. And who knows what kind of plant admixtures or mushroom admixtures they were including in there. But the looseness and relaxed quality that comes from ale can allow people to achieve inspiration. And I've been experimenting with that in my own life, just treating alcohol differently.
Mm.
We in our culture, it's sort of one of those things that we use to get out of our heads or to loosen up or to let down our social barriers. Well, though all those things may be true, it also could be used potentially medicinally. And I'm sure many people will disagree with this because it is so bad for the body and the mind. Uh, but I would say if you use it intentionally, it can produce desirable effects,
Mm.
everything in moderation, but there are no rules, like I'm never going to be an alcoholic again, but I've found a lot of benefit from drinking alcohol intentionally and using it as a way to, you know, gain insight or think in a different way that I wasn't thinking before I started drinking the alcohol.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all a relationship, right? So it's like nothing is good or bad, but it's your relationship to it and how you're using it. And so it's like, what's your intention and noticing, like, what does that do for me? What is the cost of it? Is there cost? Is the benefit bigger than the cost? Am I using it to just distract and escape, or am I using it as a way to connect and or connect with something bigger than me? Or it's so interesting, like hearing you talk about shifting your relationship to alcohol. And I'm in the middle of taking 1 year off, like 1 year of sobriety from alcohol, from marijuana, from any psychedelics, everything. Um, and it feels really good. I mean, since January, and actually probably since I think the last time I had a drink was Thanksgiving at your house. But I kind of officially started this thing at January, and I feel really good. And it's, you know, the reason I chose a year is because there's always a reason to imbibe, to drink, you know, with holidays, or okay, now it's a birthday and now it's a thing. And so it's just like to give myself like, I'm gonna go one lap and just be like, nope, I'm not, that's not even an option. Right. And one, I love the clarity I feel. I love that, you know, there's been several times where I go to a barbecue or like my birthday party or something where the next day I'm like, I feel great. There's no heaviness. There's that the cost. Alcohol does have a cost on my body. And I don't know. Lately I'm like, I don't feel an urge to go back and drink. Like I can feel that the cost of it. And so I'm curious what'll happen after a year. You know, maybe I do drink every once in a while. It's like I'm not like opposed to it, but it would have to be like a very like a good reason, an intentional, like, okay, I'm doing this and I'm gonna do it intentionally. And um, but I'm really curious, and I can't remember if you and I have talked about this. I feel like we must have, but um I've heard that, you know, in these ancient Germanic cultures, like they would brew ale for the medicinal reasons. Like it wasn't necessarily like the alcohol was actually probably pretty low. And a lot of times, like I used to be a brewer, and so I know that, you know, in times past, like they would beer is what they would drink for water because the water wasn't always safe to drink, but it was a very, very weak beer, very like very low alcohol, but it was just fermented enough that it would kill off any bacteria. And so that would be like, that's what they're drinking for water. But in the same way, like they would make these ales with different plants and different herbs as a way to get the plants and the herbs in them, not as a way to get drunk. And like you said, like who knows what they're putting in there. But I'm like, I'm fascinated with that. I would love to experiment with making my own, or just, you know, or just experience these different ways where it's like the goal isn't, here's this double IPA with 8% alcohol that's, you know, like I'm like, I want like a 2% alcohol, and like all like different, you know, I don't even know. I'm sure, you know, you and Julia know a lot more about like what plants, you know, you could put in there. And but that fascinates me.
Same here. Absolutely. I mean, that's what motivated me to start making my own alcohol recently, and we have talked about this, but I'll share my thoughts on it anyway. Because there was no commercial yeast back then. There was no like chemical additives that they could add to make it cleaner or to make it, you know, feed the yeast and make it produce more alcohol. I often think about this like some crazy nomad back in the day was probably wandering around thirsty and he saw uh some water, and there was a beehive that had fallen in the water and honey from the beehive, and honey has yeast. And some crazy guy was like, "Oh man, I'm thirsty." And he drank that honey water that who knows how long it had been sitting there fermenting. And then all of a sudden, he feels this effect from the honey water that he just drank and probably thought, "Oh my God, I'm in the world of the divine. I'm in the world of the gods. I got to reproduce this."
Mm.
And to me, that's the story of the first alcohol. The most ancient form of alcohol is honey water that was left to ferment.
Mm-hmm.
And there's yeast floating around in the air, there's yeast in the honey. That's where the yeast came from. It was collected from the air and the honey. So that's how I've decided I want to brew alcohol, is only by collecting wild yeast from the air and from the honey and from the medicinal plants, because there's yeast everywhere, all over plants.
Mhm.
And so I've started experimenting. I haven't drank any of it yet because they're not done, but I've started experimenting with brewing alcohol in that way, and also with the intention of collecting the medicine from the plants. So the first one I did was dandelion, which has a lot of medicinal effects, and meadowsweet, which is sort of like it has some similar effects to aspirin, but it's good for your gut and good at relieving pain. And the Vikings almost certainly used meadowsweet in their brewing and they would collect yeast from the meadowsweet plant and brew with that for the medicinal effects. But I've also done one with stinging nettle, which you've experienced recently. And the next one I'm going to do is mugwort. And mugwort, its traditional name is cronewort because it's the wort just means the common plant of, and a crone is like an old wise woman. And so cronewort was the plant of the old wise woman. And it's been commonly called mugwort because they would use it to brew alcohol. A mug of beer. It was
Huh.
mugwort before there were hops and other common plants that we use today. Mugwort was one of the original plants.
Hmm.
So that's the next one I'm going to be brewing is mead with mugwort for the yeast and for the medicinal effect of the mugwort. And mugwort has been known to enhance dreams. So I'm curious if it will add some sort of a, I don't know, dreamy flavor to the experience, or maybe give me better sleep with the alcohol. I don't know. We'll see what happens, but that's the one
Hmm.
I'm most excited about right now is
Yeah,
brewing with mugwort.
that's so cool.
I purposely didn't use a hydrometer too, like because that's used to help uh figure out the percentage of alcohol when you're
Hmm.
done. I purposely didn't use that because I'm like, they wouldn't know how strong it was back then. They were brewing it because they wanted the medicine and the clean water and the
Hmm.
ale. They
Yeah.
weren't thinking about percentages. They were thinking about this magical alchemical process that I'm helping along to produce an
Hmm.
effect. So I have no
Hmm.
idea how strong they're going to be. They're active though. You can see the yeast working. So
Hmm.
it worked, but
Cool.
I
I
will
mean,
save some
you'll know
bottles
when
for you.
you. Awesome. I can't
Yeah,
wait.
yeah,
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I was gonna say you'll know you'll have a sense when you drink it, right? Like that's how they would know. It's like, oh, I don't have a calculation, but I drank it and like, whoa, old Farmer John, he makes a strong brew, you know?
Farmer Yawn.
Farmer John, yeah. Oh man, beautiful. I kept thinking, I mean, I love where we're going with this, where we've gone with this conversation, and I mean, I love exploring these runes, and I love the dialogue that we get into, and I would just love to hear you're putting on a rune class. You could just, I mean, who knows who's going to listen to this and if it's going to come out before the class, but I just signed up for it. I'm stoked to engage more, and like just maybe you could share a little bit for anyone who is going to hear like what what's this rune class about. I mean, obviously we're exploring right now, so there's a taste, but could you say
Sure.
anything else?
The way I think about the runes is in the same way that different personality tests and systems of thought, like astrology, are ways of looking at the world. When you understand the runic energies, it's provides you with a way of looking at the world that to me makes sense. These symbols have been around for thousands of years, and the ancients were very tuned in to the natural forces and natural energies of life. So much so that they could recognize patterns, and they gave these patterns names, and those names are the runes. So the importance of this and why I find it interesting is because once you learn the energy of a rune, you can't forget it. And once you've learned and understood what that pattern is, you see it in your life everywhere. And it creates this really incredible, unique way of looking at the world that helps you understand your place in it. You know, these runes are akin to like a zipped computer file. When you receive a zipped computer file on your computer, you can see the name of the file. That would be like the name or the symbol of the rune. But you don't know what's in the file until you unzip it. There could be all kinds of information in there.
Mm.
And the unzipping of the runes is a process. You know, there are all these runic scholars and historians who apparently are masters and they know exactly what it means and they have studied it and gone to school for it. And I'm like, that's not me. But also, something about these ancient symbols has survived to this day. And when you start going inside of yourself and seeking insight into these runes, the flavor remains the same. The impressions that I pick up on the rune and the impressions that you might pick up on a rune when we're doing a meditation may be completely different, almost certainly, because we're different people. But there are elements to it that I can guarantee you are going to be the same. There are elements that we're both going to pick up on that are the same, and that's the runic energy. There are ways of accessing this information. There are ways of unzipping those files.
Mm.
And so my intention with this class is not to tell people what the runes mean and what they are. It's to provide an experience for people to explore them on their own and gain their own insight into it and be able to learn how to unzip these packets of information on their own and perhaps use the skills they've learned in other areas of their life. The runes are just the main platform.
Mm. Awesome. I love it. I'm excited to engage and to learn more. And yeah, I love lately when I have like a slower morning, I'll go out on my front porch and I'm sitting in the sun, drinking my coffee, and I'll just pull a rune card and like read about it. And it's just like a nice for me, like that's how I'm starting to engage, just like this like contemplating, just sitting with that symbol and just not grasping too much on any one interpretation that this author is saying, but just letting it like wash over me and just like kind of like sitting in the soup of it or something. And as you were sharing too, it made me think of Carl Jung, and he has this one of his books is called Man and His Symbols, and he talks about like the power of symbols and archetypes, right? And those two could be used interchangeably, but like if you look across cultures, like there's this collective, he calls it the collective unconscious, where across cultures people will report dreams or images that they're getting, and they correlate with things that they're going through. Like they'll have a patient and he's going through this certain process of healing or of discovery, and these certain symbols will show up in dreams that they're the same symbols as someone else. And it's like, where did that come from? They don't even know that symbol, right? No one taught them this symbol, like a cross with a circle around it, or like a mandala, or like these certain things. But there's just something about the symbolic nature where it's like there's so much information packed into one form. And again, it's like Ansus is like, where does that come from? We don't know where it comes from, but there is, when we're open to it and we pay attention, there's similarities. And that's like, and to me, like that the same could be said as like for an archetype, right? An archetype is like a collective symbol or collective like energy, an energetic blueprint of something. And there's so much packed in there. Like we can all think like the archetype of a good noble king. We know that archetype, right? We feel it, we recognize it. That's, and we recognize when it's off in movies and stories, whatever. It's like or the archetype of like the noble warrior, like all these things. It's like it exists somewhere beyond just this physical form, and we can channel it and learn to tune into it and yeah, like harness it and be aligned with these different energies. I just there's something about that really lights me up. It's like yeah.
I love your excitement. And I think the reason that these things are so fascinating is because it somewhat points to the beyond. It points to the unseen world. It points to, for lack of a better term, heaven, the afterlife, where we come from, where we go when we die. And I think humans innately are fascinated by the unknown. We're fascinated by things that we can't explain. This whole life is a beautiful mystery. And to varying degrees, we want to understand a little piece of that mystery. And so symbol systems and archetypes are connected with the beyond, as are art and creativity and forms of expression. They all touch the other side, right? And so anything that gets us in touch with the other side in a nonverbal way, in a way that is not using common language, it's something that has to be experienced, something that has to be felt in your body. And
Mm,
even if you tried to explain it, the words wouldn't do it justice, right? It's just like the Tao, you know,
mm,
it, the infinite Tao cannot be spoken of because anything that you try to say about it is going to fall infinitely short of what it actually is.
mhm,
And the more you become in touch with it, the less you really know about it.
mm,
And so the runes especially are resonant for me because that's my ancestry. I feel the same way about the Kabbalah and Hebrew symbols and Sanskrit and, all of these other ways of communicating information. They have their root in the unknown. This is just the symbol system that has lit me up the most. And I've explored all those other ones pretty in depth as well.
mm,
Just over the years, I think one of the authors says, once you've made contact with the runic energies, they will seize you and they won't let go. So,
mm,
and I feel that.
mhm,
I feel like it has touched me deeply. And, I never know what's going to happen with my life, but they're a part of me now. And I won't forget. And the exploration will continue for
mm,
my whole life, and so I'm excited to teach about it because I've kind of developed my own ways of interacting with the runes and essentially it's all about getting into a relaxed, receptive state, having something to give your mind food to chew on. Like I always start by looking at somebody else's interpretations and reading what the symbols meant to the ancients and what they mean to these people who are interpreting them. And then I'll set that down and let it go and do my process of
mm,
opening myself up to the runic energy. And it is just absolutely profound what impressions come through and feel true. And then
mm.
I'll jot them down. I don't want to give away too much because that's what you'll learn in the class, but it's
Yeah.
it's fun, it's fascinating, it's something else to do. So another way of exploring my internal world and exploring the universe around me.
Mm. I love it. Yeah, I love how much you light up about it and just like I mean, I can see that you enjoy engaging and learning this thing. And so I'm just stoked to support you and to learn from you and yeah, I mean I feel very similarly like something about the runes clicks in me as well. And so there's just like this natural like magnetism there. And so I'm
Mm.
like, yeah, I wanna learn. I mean, anytime we talk about it, like it just feels like we both just kind of like go back and forth and build something and like fill out the picture, fill
Mhm.
out the, like my embodied knowing or relationship with these different symbols, these different energies. So
Do
yeah.
you have a favorite rune that you've been meditating on?
Um, just the one that's most recently with me is Tiwaz. Um, and which I love maybe the little journey that I went to get there. I have this little deck of runes that I just made myself. I cut out some squares, I drew the runes on there. Um, and as I play with it more, like it's fascinating, profound how sometimes like it's just the perfect one. I'm like, wow, I just pulled that. Like any, I mean, any like a tarot deck or whatever, like it seems to me the more you use it, the more it attunes to you somehow. And that's a whole mystery in itself. Like, how does that work? I have no idea. But sometimes it's just the perfect rune. And just the other day, I sat out and I was having my coffee and I'm like, oh, I'll pull a rune. And I pulled one. And I think I just, I set the question of just like, even like being like, okay, Odin, what do you have a message for me? What do I need to hear today? And I think it was a different rune. Burkano came up. And I'm like, okay, interesting. But then as I was looking through my book, Burkano and Tiwaz are paired together. I don't know if that's always the case, but in this book, they have these pairings. And so I kind of looked at Burkano, but then I flipped next and Tiwaz was there. And Tiwaz is just like, so it was like this chain of events. It was like I pulled the one and then that led to the book and the book led to the next one. And it was Tiwaz. And what I'm sitting with Tiwaz is like this discipline. This like there's like Tiwaz is like this warrior of like justice. He's got Tyr, who's yeah, like it's like justice and but there's something, I mean, the way I'm relating to it is this like a little bit more order or a little bit like doing what needs to be done. Um, yeah, doing what needs to be done in my life. Like there's a little bit of like this like grounding energy and like focus, right? Even like the rune itself is like an arrow pointing up, right? So it's like there's like this focus at a point. And so I imagine that like on my forehead of just this like, yeah, sitting with that energy somehow is helping me be like, okay, there's things that need to be done. I got this. I can do it. Right. Um, yeah.
Well, I love that, and I love that it's resonating with you, and I'd love to give my interpretation of that too, if that's all right.
Yeah.
The way I see it is Tiwaz is yes, it's all about justice and doing the right thing, and it's also about self-sacrifice. And the story
Mm-hmm.
about Tyr
Yeah.
is very cool. It's and I love the Old Norse because they're very humorous. They're very like, it's not all like a serious mythological story. There's a lot of like humor and playful nuance in there. But the story of Tyr and Tiwaz is like there's the Fenris wolf, which is this like source of chaos in the realm, and the gods are kind of trying to keep the Fenris wolf contained so that chaos doesn't wreak havoc over all the worlds. And Fenris wolf is like this fierce, gnarly, profoundly strong beast, right? And they keep putting chains around him to try and contain him, but Fenris Wolf kind of laughs at the chains and he keeps breaking them. And so the gods devise a plan to sort of trick the Fenris Wolf by using his ego. So they say, ah, Fenris Wolf, this chain is so strong, I doubt you could ever break it. And he said, ah, I can break any chain, put it around me. And immediately he broke that chain.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they
Mm-hmm.
did that, one or two more times. He broke the chain every time. And then they had this magic chain made by the dwarves, and it looks really thin and frail, but it's
Mm-hmm.
it's insanely strong. And so they say, they've done this little competition a few times, and they say, "Ah, Fenris Wolf, this last chain, there's no chance you'll be able to break it." And he goes, "Oh, look at that. It's like floss, it's so thin. Of course I'm going to be able to break that." But he suspects something because they've been trying to contain him with all these chains. And so he says, all right, I will allow you to contain me with this chain, but only if you put one of your hands in my mouth
Mm.
to show that you're not tricking me. And none of the gods wanted to do that, but Tyr stepped up right away and said, I will do it. And so they put the chain around him. He put his hand in Fenris Wolf's mouth, and the wolf couldn't get away, but he bit off Tyr's hand. And so Tyr willingly made that self-sacrifice for the good of all people, for the good of all the entire universe, not just the gods, but for the good of everyone and everything. And the reason that I think that is so profound for you is because you're making a big self-sacrifice right now. You have decided no substances, no alteration in consciousness. I want to see what happens in this year. I want to see if I can continue to build my family from this healthy place. You are making that self-sacrifice for the good of yourself, for the good of your family, and essentially for the good of your community, because more clarity, more awareness means that you're going to be a better dude. You're going to be a more impeccable man and an integral part of the community. So I think it's a really beautiful correlation there, and I'm glad that that's resonating with you.
Yeah, I love it. I love that story. I love just the Norse myths and how much information can get passed through in a story, like the feeling of it. And I love that reflection from you as well. Just that, I mean, that relationship between order and chaos,
Hmm.
right? It's like Fenris Wolf is chaos, is like primal energy. And Tyr is like justice warrior, like doing the right thing. And so there's this balance, and he's like, yeah, I'll put my hand in there. It's like, of course, it's like they're actually like, it's like they're not actually separate, right? It's like Tyr and Fenris Wolf are, it's a bind rune right there, right? It's Tyr and the wolf together.
Yes, they're inseparable now.
Yeah,
He's
yeah.
literally eaten a piece of him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Ah, man, that's great. What about you? Any rune that's with you right now?
Well, I do this little rune exploration process that I've developed probably 2 to 3 times a week to try and connect with the symbols more intimately and get more understanding. And always more is coming through. But I would have to say the one that's had the most profound effect on my life is Fehu, the very first rune. And that rune it's somewhat hard to understand in its fullness because it's about the creation of the universe through fire, sort of associated with like what we would call the Big Bang, or like the primordial releasing of energy that created the whole universe.
Hmm.
And in that occurrence, there's this exchange that happens from nothingness into somethingness. And when you bring that all the way down to the most mundane level, it has to do with the exchange of energy and the exchange of currency. And so when I first started getting really excited and interested in the runes, I was like reading all these books, and I was like, okay, I'm just going to start at the beginning. I'm going to start with Fehu. And the more I've dove into that energy of Fehu, and even right at the beginning when I started, like chanting it and visualizing the symbol and connecting with that energy, more things around exchange and currency started coming into my life. I started paying more attention to economics just naturally. I had no interest in like stocks or cryptocurrency or economy at large. I was just like anybody else, just money is money. I need it for things. And I started to realize, wow, I need to make some serious changes because I want more money. I want to be able to exchange more. I want to have more freedom. And so I really connect with that rune because when I started looking into it, all these things fell into my life. All these aspects around exchanging currency started bubbling up within me and appearing in my outside world, and they continue to do so today, and it's made me a different person.
Mm,
So I love that rune. Anytime that I pull it, I'm like, okay, great. What's coming my way today? Or, what kind of an exchange am I going to have with somebody? And it isn't just about currency. It's about like, if I want to get healthy, I'm going to have to give a certain amount of energy to exercise or to preparing healthy food. That's my fehu for health,
mm,
is what I'm exchanging for that good health. It's what I'm putting in there and what I'm receiving.
mm,
So it's just amazing. Anytime you're tapping into something like that, it's going to appear more in your life, especially if you believe that everything that's happening around you in this universe is a reflection of what's going on within you. I really
mm,
believe that, and I've seen it countless times. I see it every single day.
mm,
So they have truly touched me, and for people who are drawn to them, I think the deeper you can connect with them, the more profound effect they're going to have in your life. Just like people of Hebrew background who really get into Kabbalah, it starts to change them from the inside out and from the
mm,
outside in.
mm. Yeah. Yeah. It's like anything, right? It's like there's no one way to do any of this. And like you said, there's no rules. There's no like this is the only way that's going to work for everyone. But it's finding the way that lights you up, that you get to engage with the mystery from an inside out way. That's how I think about it, right? It's like it's one thing to just hear words and have it be like a mental construct of like, okay, I've been told that, but it's like, what's the way that actually feels true for you that you get to engage with the other side? I like that you said that, right? It's like the other side, and like get closer to it, and okay, here's what I'm giving, and here's what I'm listening to receive, and so it's like, I mean, there's an infinite number of ways. And
Yeah.
so it's like about finding your way, and this is the way that you found, and this is also like this is part of it, right? This is part of the exchange is you then teaching and sharing,
Yes.
and yeah, I love it.
Yeah. It's a really cool thing to be alive, isn't
It's amazing.
it?
Oh, it's amazing. I love it. Yeah.
Wow.
Oh,
Well, this has been a super fun conversation about runes that I didn't expect this morning, but I'm glad we got into it, and it's been fun to see where it went. I hope to have more conversations about this because there's just so much there, so much to unpack, and the more I dive into it, the more is revealed, and even more mystery is revealed as well.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, indeed.
Do you
Beautiful,
have
man.
any final thoughts for me or our listeners?
Hmm. Yeah, I guess I'm just for whoever's listening, I'm there's a question that's coming out. It's like, what's your way to engage with the mystery? Like if you don't know it, then find it. And even that, even like finding your way is a mystery, right? So like there's no way to be lost in it. There's no way to be like, oh, I just don't know. It's like, well, great, that's a perfect place to start. Is the not knowing and just like I don't know. I would love to hear from people. I don't know if we have ways to actually hear. I know that you can fill out an answer on Spotify, but maybe as we get more into this thing that we're doing, we'll find more ways of actually getting responses from people and having it be like getting feedback. But I would love to hear from people like how do they engage with the mystery? How do they imbibe the mystery, right? It's like or dance with it, and be in that place of like looking right into the void and listening and putting yourself into it and then receiving and spiraling, up. So I don't know. Whatever comes to that question, that's what I'm putting out there.
Well, I love that prompt. And I would even put this to our listeners. If you would like to talk with us about it, reach out and let's have you on the podcast because I'm interested in talking with people who are finding their way and imbibing in that mystery in their own way. And I'm almost certain that anybody who's doing that has a story to tell. So if you feel called, reach out to us and we'd love to talk to you.
Yes. Yes. Love that.
Excellent, brother. Well, that's it for today. I look forward to our next conversation and until next time, man.
Yeah. Likewise. Thank you, brother.
Thank you. Much love.